Premier League's most disastrous managerial reigns, from de Boer to Siewert. The Premier League has been graced by some of the finest managers in the world, but not everyone can hack it in the top flight, and when it comes to managerial disasters, it's hard to look past Frank de Boer, who turns 52 today. De Boer was a legend in his playing days, but he was a huge flop in the dugout during his brief stint in England with Crystal Palace, in a stint that is likely to never be forgotten by Eagles fans. Remarkably, his record pales in comparison to some of his managerial counterparts. Here, Daily Star Sport takes a trip down memory lane to reminisce over some of the top flight's most catastrophic managerial stints, from de Boer's misery in the capital to the man who bossed the team that is officially recognized as the worst in Premier League history. When it comes to nightmare stints in the Premier League, it's hard to look past de Boer. The Dutchman was handed the reins by Palace back in the summer of 2017 and even penned a 3-year deal with the South London outfit. But he was booted out the door barely 2.5 months into that bumper agreement. The veteran was axed after just 77 days in the Selhurst Park hot seat after failing to win any of his 5 matches in charge, and he didn't even get to see his Palace side find the net in the Premier League. Somehow, de Boer's disastrous stint in the top flight didn't prevent the Netherlands from handing him the national job in 2020. But he was sacked less than 12 months later after Holland were dumped out of Euro 2020 by Czech Republic. Who do you think is the worst manager in Premier League history? Let us know in the comments section. Following hot on de Boer's heels, Bradley is another manager who struggled to make it in the Premier League. The 64-year-old was American to ever boss in the English top flight and left a bruised reputation for the likes of Jesse Marsch to repair. Bradley was parachuted in by Swansea back in 2016 after a disastrous start to the season, but he was gone after just 85 days. The flop won just 2 of his 11 matches in charge at the Liberty Stadium and paid the ultimate price as the Swans took drastic measures to try and maintain their top-flight status. The prospect of Aston Villa dropping out of the Premier League was almost unthinkable a few years back, but that's exactly what happened on Gard's watch. Rather than turning to an established name, Villa handed the Frenchman the reins back in November 2015 when they were marooned at the bottom of the table. Unfortunately, Gard never got close to keeping them up. He was finally put out of his misery by the Villa hierarchy, who pulled the trigger at the end of March after Gard had overseen a run of 12 defeats in 13 matches, leaving Villa a staggering 12 points adrift of safety. If Villa dropped a clanger by turning to Gard in their hour of need, then Huddersfield Town didn't realize as they repeated the fatal error with Siewert. The Terriers were in a bleak position when David Wagner left the club, but former Borussia Dortmund youth coach Siewert struggled to have any sort of impact at all after he was tasked with keeping the club in the Premier League. Huddersfield were eventually relegated with a whimper after Siewert picked up just 5 points in 15 matches and are yet to bounce back to the Premier League. When it comes to disastrous Premier League campaigns, Derby County's record-breaking 2007-08 campaign simply cannot and may never be beaten. Jewell was the unfortunate man at the helm after he was picked to replace Billy Davies in November. But the ex-Wigan chief failed to win a single league game as the Rams were dumped out of the top flight with the worst points tally in Premier League history. Remarkably, Jewell wasn't sacked after relegation, but he was eventually given his marching orders the following season after failing to adapt to life in the second tier. Fulham have become one of the Premier League's many yo-yo clubs in recent years, but they used to be an established top-flight team. But they slipped out of the Premier League on Magath's watch, even though the rot at Craven Cottage had set in long before the German tactician was drafted in. Magath failed to inspire a turnaround down by the river and was given the boot after just 6 months by the Craven Cottage hierarchy.